your host, the Right Reverend David Clark, and we are in the middle of a crisis in America, and this drug recovery conference is designed to bring solution to this particular crisis. And next on our agenda is to address the caregivers who have a passion to help and to comfort and relieve persons who are in pain and in agony and who are sick, but they need more effective training. And the clergy provides many of these type of caregiving services. But today, we're going to bring you one of the most prolific trainer in the country from Awake, Pittsburgh, Dr. Stephanie Monroe. Let's receive her in her own particular way.
Thank you. We're having just a little bit of technical problem with the projector, but I think we'll just go with it and it'll be pink. It is somehow coming across as pink. So I think we'll just look at the PowerPoint. That's okay. Yeah. So thank you so much, Reverend Clark, for having us come and present for you and your community. So my name is Stephanie Romero, and I'm with Danae Clark, and we work for Awaken Pittsburgh, which is a small local nonprofit that does work to bring mindfulness into communities. We do a lot of work in educational institutions and with helping professionals, and Danae is the deliverer that works with us on addiction recovery. And since it's a mindfulness presentation, I thought we would start this afternoon with a mindfulness practice. This is 3 centering breaths. And so the practice is very simple. We take 3 belly breaths where we deeply breathe, fully and completely filling the belly. And then we try to extend the out breath longer than the in breath. So I would invite you to try that with me. So again, I'll talk you through the first one, and then you can do it on your own. So breathing in, fully and completely fill your belly. Pause a moment, and now try to extend that exhale longer than that inhale was. You could try 3 more on your own. Thank you so much. So whenever I'm invited to present, I love to just share a little bit about why I am presenting on this topic. And for me, about 16 years ago now, I was having a bit of a life crisis. I was going through a divorce, and for me it felt like a real just kind of falling apart of my whole life at that moment. And my mom, of all people, handed me this book, which is When Things Fall Apart, and by Pema Chodron. And the book for me really changed my life. And I have a quote that I'm going to read to you from the book to just explain what that was about, and hopefully give you an idea of really what it meant for me. And the quote is, "Things falling apart is a kind of testing and also a kind of healing. We think the point is to pass the test or to overcome the problem. But the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and they fall apart. Then they come together again and then they fall apart again. And the healing comes from letting there be room for all of this to happen. Room for grief, room for relief, for misery, and for And that really just spoke to me deeply because that's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to kind of ride that waves of life. You know, when life is very beautiful, it's easy, but then when some tragedy strikes you, it's much more difficult. How do you kind of keep your center through all of that, right? What supports you so you don't really feel like everything is falling apart? And we have all had these experiences. It might be a car accident, a cancer diagnosis in the family, a loved one that passes, you know, someone loses a job, all of those things that come and go in our lives. How do we keep our center? And in this book, Pema Chodron was saying, meditate. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to try that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to learn how to meditate. And so I started trying to figure out how am I going to meditate. And it was actually quite a disaster. When you get still and you really sit with your mind, when you already have chaos, right? You're sitting and that's all right there for you. And I was like, why on earth would anyone want to do this? You know, it does not seem like the thing to do. And really, I understood that maybe I was not fully understanding what the process was. What was I supposed to be doing? How am I supposed to work with my mind? And so it's always good when you have a girlfriend. I, with a girlfriend, started going on field trips all around the Pittsburgh area to the various meditation centers and trying to seek out some information on how do I do this? How do I work with the chaos that I feel inside? And eventually, I found a variety of wonderful teachers, and one of them, his name is Adam LaBelle, really helped me understand a different way of working with myself and my mind. And I was able then to find meditation as a resource to finally develop that centeredness, right? And it really has been a life-changing experience for me, bringing meditation into my life and working with my mind in a different way. So much so that through this process, and I was a public school teacher for many years, I realized that folks were actually doing meditation and mindfulness in schools. And around 2013, I was getting ready to propose my dissertation and actually shifted my topic to be mindfulness and education and wrote that as my dissertation. In that process, I began to ask myself, you know, as a teacher getting a doctorate in education, you're expected or on that track to go into upper administration, right? And after spending a few years researching and really studying mindfulness and educational systems, I started to ask the question, now that I know what I know, how can I have the biggest impact, right? And I was not sure that doing administrator's work in the Pittsburgh area at that time was going to be the right path for me because there wasn't quite an openness yet to mindfulness in the education sector. So with a group of wonderful supporters and friends, including Danae, we started the nonprofit Awaken Pittsburgh, and our mission is to promote personal and community well-being through mindfulness programs and compassionate action. So today, what I hope to bring to you is a little conversation around stress, emotions, how you work with those, and the people that you serve. We'll get a little definition of what mindfulness is. We'll talk a little bit about what mindfulness can actually do for us and the research around how it supports us in our life. We'll get another little taste of how to use it and talk about maybe who's using it. And Danae's going to share with us her journey with mindfulness and how it can support addiction recovery. And we'll intersperse in there a little bit more practice besides what we did at the beginning. So we do quite a bit of research on our programs, and one of the surveys that we use is the self-report stress survey. And so thinking for yourself right now, on a scale from never, sometimes, frequently, or always, if you had to answer one of the questions on the stress survey for the last month, how often have you felt nervous or stressed? So never, sometimes, frequently, or always. And you don't have to share, just thinking for yourself, how often have you felt nervous or stressed? How often have you found that you could not cope with all the things you had to do? Right? Never, sometimes, frequently, and I see people laughing here, right? Because it's frequent for all of us, right, in our lives. How often have you been angered because of things that were outside of your control? right? When we do our pre-survey, we're getting a lot of frequently and always on these types of questions. And that last question about being angry, actually we know that anger is a high indicator of stress, and anger is also a high indicator of compassion fatigue. So if you find when you're serving people and you're showing up to provide support and you're feeling angry at them, that could actually be an indication that you are experiencing secondary trauma, right? So it's a really important thing to notice. And if you think about the people that you're serving, if we ask those same questions about them, right? How often are they feeling nervous and stressed? How often do they feel like they can't cope with everything they have to do, or they're angry at things out of their control, right? Again, oftentimes the people that we're serving are at that frequently and always mode with their stress level, right? And our bodies were designed, right, from way back in prehistoric time to react in a certain way to a stress, right? And back in the day where we had actually to survive in the wild, the saber-toothed tiger was our stress. Our appropriate response was to fight that saber-toothed tiger or run to get out of there. And our bodies responded in a way with a surge of hormones so that we could do that. But now that stressor is maybe a social situation, right? Maybe an email that we get in our inbox is that stressor. We're not hopefully going to be fighting anyone, and we're not able to go running away from it, but the reaction in our physical body is the same, right? The problem is that we're not releasing those stress hormones because we're not doing that action. And so over time, with chronic large stressors, this is then affecting every single system in our body, right? So you can think about that idea that you get stomach aches when you're too nervous. Our whole digestive tract is affected by stress, right? We see higher rates of diabetes over long-term stress. We see higher rates of heart disease. We have mental kind of depression and other kinds of mental symptoms with long-term stress. Reproductive issues related to stress. So every system of our body, there was even a study that I read which was amazing. The pH, the acidity in our saliva changes, and we get more cavities when we're under prolonged stress. So I'm not talking about just like one little incident, I'm talking about long-term stress. And we also know that systemic racism, poverty, these are also long systemic stressors that people in our communities are constantly under. And so the health risks involved with not finding ways to work with our stressors are really serious. And as care providers, we are taking that on even more, right? Because we're trying to provide support for the communities that we serve. And so for me, the interesting thing is that large organizations are kind of getting on with this idea that actually we can use mindfulness to help our employees or our sports teams de-stress. And so just a few names to mention, the Lakers and the Bulls, right? They brought in, before a lot of their championship wins, mindfulness practices, right? The Seattle Seahawks, before they won the Super Bowl, brought in mindfulness the 2 years prior. And big companies like Google, General Mills, Goldman Sachs, Intel, and Aetna Insurance is now providing mindfulness for their insured. So a lot of folks that are embracing this as a way to help people deal with stress. And I'm going to skip the video because I don't think we're going to be able to see it, and the folks there are not going to be able to see it. But it was a really interesting video with Phil Jackson, who was the coach for the Bulls and the Lakers, and you can Google it. Oprah Winfrey interviewing Phil Jackson on his use of mindfulness with his players and how that led to the 11 championships that he had in the NBA. So you can Google that. So what is this thing, mindfulness? Well, my favorite definition is that it's paying attention to what's happening right now, including our mental events. And the way we pay attention is really important here. You have to pay attention with curiosity, openness, and acceptance. And this piece, acceptance here, is not a moral judgment. It's the opposite of denial. And we've all had this moment where something happens, we really don't want to deal with it, so we're just going to pretend like it's not even there, right? Everybody has done that, right? So this is like, no, this is here. Just accepting what is really in front of us and approaching it with some curiosity and openness instead of being quick to judge. And I think that the other piece of this that's really important is that bringing these practices into our lives is kind of like that metaphor of putting our own oxygen mask on first, right? So if we want to show up and serve others, we really have to be working to manage our own stress and our emotional reactivity. And the mindfulness practices actually give us a way to do that. And so I want to give you just a couple of examples of people in history that have really inspired me in my search of mindfulness that have, I think, embodied compassionate action and service. And the first one is MLK Jr. If we think about him and what made him a great leader, we can say that he had a really clear vision of what he wanted to do and where he wanted to go, that he was definitely acting from loving compassion. He had an ethic of service to make the world a better place, and he knew how to connect with other people. And interestingly enough, in March of 1968, shortly prior to his death, he actually wrote an entire talk, which you can Google, which is called Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution. And if you really listen to that, it talks about his contemplative practice and how that helped him pay attention in a certain way. And the other person I just want to highlight with mindful service is Nelson Mandela. If you read his authorized biography, he actually talks about how we work with our mind and our feelings through meditation. And he says regular meditation, just 15 minutes a day, can be the way to really tap into those inner qualities and then show up in service of others. So I would just say that we have a lot of folks that have done great work and service that have used this as a resource in their lives. So what exactly is it that I'm talking about? So I'd like to just guide you in the, I guess, what people most often think about as a mindfulness practice, which is a breath-focused awareness practice. And we'll just do about 3 minutes. So the first piece of a practice is always what posture you take. And people often ask me, why does it matter what posture I take? And I say, well, you want to do something that's going to bring peace into your life, right? That's going to uplift your spirit. And we actually know now, this is like my grandma's wisdom telling me to stand up straight. I don't know if you had an aunt or a grandma that was always telling you that, take that certain posture. But actually we know now that you embody your dignity and your worth in your posture. And even if you don't quite believe it, you will shift your mindset by the posture that you hold. So we want to embody that for ourselves. So we're going to sit upright as best we can. If you have back issues, please do what you need to do to take care of yourself. So not too upright that it's stiff. There's still some softness in there, but upright, feet flat on the floor if you're able. And we can just rest our hands in our laps where they fall. And we take a moment to just check in with our body, see how we're feeling at the moment. And whatever you're finding is just fine. You don't have to try to change or fix anything. You're just noticing, right? Just noticing what's there for you. Maybe something in your thinking, maybe something in your emotions right now that's there for you, something pulling your attention away, no big deal. Whatever's there for you, you can just take a moment and notice that. And as you're ready, you can shift your attention to the feeling of your body breathing. So any physical sensations of the body breathing that you notice. And if it's hard for you to feel what that's like, you can take a couple of deeper breaths just to notice, what am I feeling in my breathing today? necessarily trying to change or manipulate the breath, it's just the natural breathing. And what happens eventually is that your mind will start to be distracted and wander away from the feeling of the body breathing. So whenever you notice that that's what's going on, you're simply going to come back to the feeling of the body breathing. No big deal. It's bound to happen. Mind wanders. Just coming back to the feeling of the body breathing. So we're going to try that for about 2 more minutes, and then I'll ring the chime to kind of bring us back together. But oftentimes people say to me, it just seems so simple. You're asking me to sit and just notice my body breathing. So why is that something important to be doing, right? Why do I want to incorporate that into my daily living? It doesn't seem like it's doing much of anything. And actually, there's a lot of research now that shows that it actually changes our brains. And so it actually changes our brains in 2 ways. So we live in a time now where they can actually see what's happening in our brains while we're still alive, right, with the MRIs. And so they put people in a fMRI, which shows the actual functioning of the brain, and they'll ask people to just do a thinking task, right? And so they light up the brain. If you can see it, it's a little hard to see, but the picture on the right, on the left-hand side, that's a brain of a long-time meditator just thinking, doing some thinking task, right? And then they have the person meditate, and at the end of the meditation, the picture of the brain on the right, with hardly any color in it, is actually the brain state at the end of meditation. And so you're actually training your brain to calm. And so in these moments of heightened stress, you can tap into that, because we know now there's this thing called plasticity, neuroplasticity. When you start to do something regularly, you actually create a pathway in your brain that becomes habit formation, right? Not just meditation, anything. They've done studies with people juggling, right? If you juggle enough, you create a pathway for, talent and coordination, right? You start to build that. Anything you do, you're actually changing your brain. So why not use that power of our brains to start to bring in stress relief, right? So you can meditate and come to that calm place, and then when you're really stressed, that pathway is there for you and you can tap into it. The other thing that it does is, so that's our brain state, our mental state, calm versus agitated, right? And then the other way it changes our brain is actually the shape and structures of the brain. So those are the traits of our actual physiology. And so I'm not gonna read through all of the areas of the brain, but just to highlight, there are now studies with folks that come back from war with severe PTSD, and they see that 2 parts in particular, the amygdala and the hippocampus, which are part of our limbic system, which control our stress response. Those areas of the brain change based on the intense amount of stress these folks are through. 8 weeks of mindfulness practice, regular daily mindfulness practice, starts to reverse those changes and bring those areas of the brain back to normal, right? So it seems super simple, but if you think about, if I'm feeling stressed, my mind's wandering. I'm starting to ruminate on all those worries that I have. Well, with meditation, what am I doing? I'm bringing it back, learning to focus, building the faculty of attention, and being able to choose where I put my attention, right? So it's building that ability in our brain. The other kinds of things that change in our brain are the areas that are involved with how I see myself in relationship to other people, empathy and compassion, right? Being able to see others in a way that is just not all about me. It builds actually structures in the brain that support that. And then there's also some benefits that those of us are starting to get at be a certain age that prevents kind of some of the effects of aging that we see in the brain. So that's good news for me as I head in that direction. So it seems very simple. You're just sitting, noticing your breathing, but you're actually building structures in your brain and pathways in your brain. And in addition to the brain research, or maybe I should say along with it, we can see that people who go through meditative practices for a minimum of an 8-week period report less stress. It also lowers blood pressure, increases relaxation, and starts to build better relationships with other people. They get a lot of social and emotional benefits. Folks who are depressed, when we add on meditation to whatever other treatment they're having, they have an improved mental state. They also, in meditators, they see that there's executive control regions of the brain that are improved. So decision-making processes and things like impulse control are also improved. And my favorite one is flu shot study. So they took a group of people and they put half of them into meditation and half of them into some other interactive activity. I don't know, maybe it was a knitting circle. I don't remember what it was. And at the end of the 8 weeks, they gave everybody a flu shot. And then they drew blood and they looked at the immune response of these folks to the flu shot. And the meditators had a statistically significant better immune response. This has been repeated with other immune diseases like psoriasis. A group of people with psoriasis get meditation, the other group is just on their medication and maybe some other intervention, and the psoriasis on their skin, it's a skin condition, gets better compared to the folks that don't have it. So there's some kind of increase in our immunity as well with meditation. So I'm going to pass it off to Danae now. Yep.
So thank you, Reverend Clark, for the invitation today. And I'm really pleased to be here to talk about mindfulness-based addiction recovery. For me, this is personal. Okay? About 10 years ago, I became curious about meditation. There wasn't any particular event or reason, although in hindsight, I probably became interested in it because of some anxiety or depression. Also at the time, I was drinking, and drinking quite heavily, and not feeling any kind of control over that. So I took some classes and went around, like Stephanie, went around to different meditation centers to get some experience and stuff. But I never really jumped into it seriously. I never made any kind of serious commitment to do this every day or anything. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was drinking, because meditation and drinking, or meditation and addiction kind of go well together. It's not a good pairing. Okay? So a few years later, a few years after that, my job came to be at risk because of my drinking. And so I didn't have a lot of choice, but I decided, okay, it's time to get into a treatment program. So that's what I did. And since I was then not working at that time, I had this opportunity, I had all this time, and I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to make that commitment. And I developed a really consistent daily meditation sort of program, and I found it to be really transforming. It helped me kick the alcoholism, and then also sustained me, and has sustained me for years after that, on my path of recovery. So, and studies actually back this up. There we go. The earliest studies are around alcoholism because it's been studied in many ways for decades. And once mindfulness-based programs began, they kind of initially went to alcoholism. One study, and I just kind of pulled this out kind of at random, 8% of participants in a mindfulness-based program reported heavy drinking after 1 year, compared to 20% of people who were in a traditional 12-step program. So it shows the difference there. This does not mean that mindfulness-based programs should replace 12-step programs. Oftentimes, they can be offered alongside each other or in addition to, but for the purpose of these, trying to make it scientific, right? They put people in control groups and try to have some people all in one group and another in another group. Okay, but it's a significant outcome. 12% fewer people, relapsed over the course of a single year. Opioid addiction and recovery are more recent in terms of studies, but one study, actually it was from 2017, found that mindfulness-based group therapy was more effective than methadone maintenance in decreasing risk behaviors among opioid-dependent patients. So,
Wow.
yeah, and this is not to say that medication-based programs are not effective or not useful. They are. But I think what studies like this indicate is that in the long term, in terms of, because you don't want to be on a medication-based program forever. Okay, so in the long term, these mindfulness-based programs are proving to be really effective, even for people who had pretty severe opioid addictions. So there's the evidence on that. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the brain.
Before you go further.
Sure. Yeah, actually, feel free to interrupt.
Do you find academic patients or people connecting with the mindfulness-based recovery program? Do you find intellectuals being attracted to use mindfulness-based programs? Or do you find uneducated people, more people uneducated being attracted to use mind-based programs?
That's an interesting question. I don't know of any sort of statistics on that or anything, but I think it's across the board. Because when you think about what mindfulness techniques are, I mean, you just experienced a mindfulness-based technique. It's paying attention to the body breathing, and you don't have to be an intellectual to experience that. I mean, that's one of the really, I think, interesting and useful things about this approach is that anybody can do it. As long as we're alive and breathing, we can do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Could you elaborate on that a little bit in terms of the way you're thinking about it?
Well, senior citizens and adults, young adults, children, it seemed like they would have a higher percentage to be able to train their mind to receive one of these particular mindfulness because of their experiences in life. So seniors may find this more attractive. Have there been any studies dealing with the type of class of people to receive or address this particular issue?
I'm not aware of any, are you?
So
You know, a younger kid, teenagers, their mind is scattered.
yeah, so,
Maybe,
yeah, so
maybe.
mindfulness is actually really interesting in the way that it's like coming into society. There's a whole bunch of programming that's happening in and around hospitals.
Okay.
And so there's mindfulness-based stress reduction, which was designed in Massachusetts at a university hospital to help people actually manage stress and pain, right? And so it's really interesting that this is an opioid-focused conference, because one of the original intentions of designing programs like the ones we deliver is to help people manage stress and pain because medications weren't helping them, right? And so if you have to manage your high level of stress or chronic condition, physical condition, and medication's not working for you, you learn to work with your mind. And it's almost like biofeedback techniques. You can control through your breathing your pain response and your stress response. And so there's a whole category that this is kind of the birthplace of mindfulness in our culture, actually, in the way that I deliver it. And what happened from there is that, like me, people got wind of it happening and said, how can we use this to support youth? And so now there's a whole variety of programs that are coming into schools. And so a lot of the work that I do is with kids and teachers in schools. And I have to tell you that the kids respond so positively to it, because I think just what you're saying, like we have this image of our teenagers like always on the phone, always on the video games, completely distracted. Once they start to feel what it's like to self-regulate and feel some peace, they want that. You know, they want that. And we've been working in some groups of kids that have been incarcerated and that have had some very severe life challenges. And they report that this is the first time in their life that they realize, oh, I can feel angry and not do something that's going to create a problem for me in my life. I don't actually have to punch that kid. I don't have to get in the fight. I can take a breath, calm myself, and walk away. And so for the first time in their lives, for some of our young people, their first time experiencing what it's like to actually center themselves and make a choice about their behavior instead of just doing something impulsively.
Right.
So my experience is like kids are hungry for this, right? They're really hungry for it. So I think that it's been spanning, the mindfulness interventions have been spanning huge range of, age groups, locations of delivery, and cultural contexts in our country.
Well, I can receive that.
Mm-hmm.
When clergy visit those who are incarcerated,
Yes,
they got a lot of time
that's right.
they got a lot of time to do or to think what they want to think, and the question is, do you have any hardcore studies for mindfulness being used in the prison system?
Yes. So actually, I delivered one mindfulness-based program here in the Allegheny County Jail. It's through the Hope pre-release program that happens in the jail. And I don't think that particular program has been researched, but the people who wrote Path of Freedom have done research. It's an international curriculum that they deliver in prisons all around the world. And they have seen that folks report more health and well-being, and there's less recidivism for graduates of that program. So there are other interventions, and I don't know if you can, I can't quote, like I didn't come prepared to quote those statistics, but but it's out there. They're researching actual use of mindfulness in the prison systems, and it's happening across not just our country, but in other places as well. Yeah.
So if there is a continued activity that's causing stress,
Yes.
you can provide the techniques that will alter that.
So I think we can't alter the external stresses in someone's life, but we can help people have techniques that help them manage that stress. If that makes sense. Like, just to give you the example of the kids in high school that we work with. High school is a stressful situation for a lot of kids for a variety of reasons. We look at their reporting how stressed they feel, or even teachers when we work with teachers. Teachers have really high stress jobs, right?
Right.
And so when we measure before and after the programming what their level of stress is, we always see a significant shift of reduction in stress. Their life has not changed, but how they're managing that stress has changed. That's correct. Yeah.
Dr. Hatt?
Sure. What was the name of your organization again?
Awaken Pittsburgh.
Awaken Pittsburgh. It's a wonderful program that you guys have. I'm just wondering, with all the statistics and all the data that we have used here today, in what way are they looking at the environment being a cause of, anger and rage,
Yeah.
especially with the statistics of the angered people and children, and then also in the prison system and just people in general with stress? I think that as a whole, we need to look at the environment that we live in, and that any therapeutic therapies or medication is always good for temporary, but also it always comes back. So that makes us go to the root cause of the problem initially, with the environment, with electromagnetic radiation that we're living in, breathing in, 5G, that causes us to be in a state of constant electric hypersensitivity, operating in that fight or flight. So I think that Awaken would probably do good with the technology that my company has to start implementing. What do you think? Because if we don't change our environment, it's just like every single cell in your body. You need water, your body's 90% water. So the fact of the matter is, if you're not drinking enough water, the environment of the cell is going to die. So in the same aspect is that we need to start educating people not only on the modality for breathing and awakening and breaths and meditation, but to have the full impact is to actually take that stressful environment away, so that we can cope and we can live in a stress-free environment. You see what I'm saying?
Oh,
I would like to
totally.
get some contact information.
Sure.
Because you guys are doing so many conferences and speaking a lot of places. But I think that part of the meditation, you need to be aware of your environment. I think it's time to start assessing. And I also said, we cannot go off of any tests that have been presented for DNA, for gene, for cell, for hormone, for any test that is used with any test period where the environment has been altered. So now that we know that electromagnetic fields and radiation cause 9 out of 10 diseases, cause these effects, they are affecting the environment. All of these tests that have been done throughout history, that have been done and tested in this type of environment, where there's been electromagnetic radiation, can actually be called null and void, and they all need to be redone because they're affected by the electromagnetic radiation. Every cell, every test, blood work, all of that, to know that our bodies are affected. So I think this is something huge that we're stumbling upon. But I think that this is such a wonderful program, and that it can actually be coupled with the technology and with creating awareness about your environment and breathing, because people need to know.
Sure. Yeah, I can't speak to the technology angle, but I think one way to get at it is to think about the idea of connection. There's a pretty common concept now in the addiction field that the opposite of addiction is connection. And that's connection with oneself. And so something like meditation, focusing on the breathing body, reducing stress, and that sort of thing is important. But there's also connection to others, healing our relationships, having kind of healthier relationships with the people in our lives. And then there's also the connection to our environment. And so that's exactly what you're talking about. So the question then becomes, what are we connecting to?
Mm-hmm.
And what makes us, healthier in our response to our environment? So I don't know that Pittsburgh can take on the job of like cleaning up the environment, reducing all the stress in the world, but we can, manage that. But understanding that that connection to our environment is very important, because we have bad habits there. They may be kind of affecting the way that we get triggered around other things.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Especially if you're stuck in the fight or flight, people impulse the button automatically. And if people aren't wearing and living in technology, that would perfectly make sense.
Right.
Yeah, and so the idea with our programming in general is that when I can self-regulate myself, then I am better equipped to be my own advocate. And so if I'm in a system that is being unjust and that's why I'm getting angry, then I have more capability to direct myself in a way that's going to be effective. Because if we're overtaken by our anger, we're then no longer effective in directing it. And so coming back to that example of Nelson Mandela or MLK, like those are men that were very angry about injustice in the world in their lives that they saw, but they were so self-regulated that they could direct an entire population of people to work with them and join in a cause to actually effectively make change. So anger can be a great tool, right? It can be a great tool, but we have to be able to manage it in a way that then we can tap into it to be effective change makers. And so I'm all about helping people in systems be self-regulated and at their best so that they can then see more clearly what routes they have to affect change and not feel overcome by those emotions where then you get paralyzed, right? We've all been in that situation where we're so overwhelmed by our emotion that we're paralyzed. And so that's my piece of it. Yeah, and I think Diddy wanted to say a few more things about.
Yeah, and that's really important because when people enter a treatment program, it's a time of great vulnerability. People are really at a crossroads. People have left behind things. In 12 steps, they talk about people, places, and things. Leaving behind those things that trigger you, that cause cravings. So people have, when they enter a program, they've agreed to leave those things behind. There's a letting go. But at the same time, there's not a real confidence about letting things come to be. So there's a feeling of being exposed. The drug or the addiction was a kind of armor, a way of kind of reducing pain or loneliness or trauma or depression or whatever it was, whatever void it was filling. And when that's gone, there is a real feeling of exposure. So in order for someone to be successful in taking that journey forward, you're going to need something powerful. You're going to need some powerful tools. Otherwise, you're going to go back to that, putting on that armor of the addiction, to try to defend yourself against whatever it is you're encountering in the world. So for me, that's where I found these mindfulness-based tools to be really effective. So it's not just about willpower. You have actual tools that can help you on this journey, and once you see how those work for you, you begin to build that confidence. Okay, it gives you a kind of clarity. It gives you a kind of confidence in staying on that road. And that's. Oh, you already did it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I can go back.
I have another quick question. I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
Would you consider meditation a form of prayer?
It definitely can be. It doesn't have to be, but it definitely can be. And so sometimes when I give talks about just mindfulness in general, There's this beautiful graphic called the Tree of Contemplative Practices. And so, stilling our mind, getting quiet, and just being, for people who are spiritually inclined, often means, touching into their relationship with God. For folks who don't have a spiritual relationship, some people experience it as, tapping into a higher self, or, different people have used different words to describe that, but I think every spiritual tradition does have a meditative piece to it, and sometimes use words like prayer to describe it, and in other traditions, I was raised Roman Catholic, there's a definite kind of, like if you think of contemplative prayer, so there's definitely a meditative quality to that. So contemplation, where you take a verse or a passage and you really just sit with that, that's a meditative practice, right? That is definitely a meditative practice. And so, I think that our wisdom traditions from all over the world and all faith traditions have some component of that. But again, what has been most researched in the Western world at this point have not been those spiritual practices, have been these kind of secularized practices. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I can't speak to the impact of prayer in the same way that I can as the more secular practices, but definitely they line up. Yeah.
Okay.
I want
to add to that. The thing is that mindfulness is not something new. It's something that's very familiar to us. I know in the past, if I've been in somewhere in a woods and I reach a vista and I'm looking out over this beautiful valley or seeing mountains, there's a moment of peace there. You get a sense of how huge the universe is and your place in it, and there's just maybe an overwhelming kind of warm feeling about being in that moment. That's mindfulness. You're right there, right in the present moment, and you're open. You're maybe curious about what's going on. You don't have harsh judgments about things. So it's not something that is different. The problem is we can't always get to that mountaintop. We don't always engage in prayer. We don't do those sorts of things that help us experience that feeling of mindfulness. So that's why these tools kind of help us with the discipline of that so that we can experience those things more regularly.
Let me ask you, I have a friend, he's about 70 years old. Her brother died suddenly. Her mother is elderly and in a dementia state. Does the mindfulness technique assist those who are grieving?
Absolutely.
Do you have specific techniques for a grief-stricken person? Do you have particular techniques for suicidal person? Do you have specific techniques that you recommend for people suffering from addiction?
Yes, one of the core central approaches to this is to be able to sit with whatever it is you're feeling. Okay? And too often people will say, we'll try to push something aside, try to push it down. Even in some types of therapy, you're told, well, if you have this addiction, try to do something else. Eat a jelly bean instead of taking a pill, something like that. Like that's going to help you in the long run. But the idea is not to find some kind of substitute, but to be able to acknowledge and be curious about what it is you're experiencing so that you can gain some kind of peace with that and a sense of clarity. So you're not pushing it aside. and you can begin to learn how the mind works. Like what triggers that craving, what triggers that sense of grief, what triggers that anger, and you learn more about your mind. So it's about bringing things to the fore, so that you can manage and understand, and it gives you a real sense. That's the sense of clarity that brings to a person is not just comforting, but it does bring with it a sense of confidence that, wow, I'm not just some victim to my mind, I'm not some victim to my emotions, but I can understand and have clarity around it, and it brings a real sense of empowerment, I think.
So,
I just would like to add to that for me in my journey with mindfulness, one of the things that often in the past would happen to me is when depression would be part of my experience, I would feel separate and alone with it and kind of isolating feeling. The practices that I've been engaged with through mindfulness is one of understanding that actually the full range of human experience is shared by all of us. So I don't have to be alone with my depression. I don't have to be alone with my grief. That actually that's part of what connects me to you as a human being. So our suffering, in addition to maybe our joys, is part of our connection as human beings. It's part of what we share. And so you can work with your difficult emotions in a way to understand that that's actually just one more way that each one of us human beings shares the full range of humanity.
the question, so can you write a prescription for this lady who lost her brother and trying to explain to her senile mother that he's gone? How do you get closure? Can you write a prescription for service or help in a situation like that?
So I think that there's actually entire books written on this topic. So a friend of mine is a death doula, so she supports people through the grieving process, and she uses mindfulness-based practices. So that's not actually the area that I feel expertise in, but I know that other folks are working in that area, and I'm sure Google search, you know what I mean? There are whole books for, mindfulness for depression, mindfulness for grief, mindfulness for making sports practitioners more high performing, so at this point in time, like there are so many resources out there. I would say that my expertise is not in grief in particular, but I do know that it's being used in that way. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I just didn't know, but I
Yeah.
just, when you talk about tools,
Yes.
methods that professional use in caregiving, I'm just thinking that somebody authorized to write prescription for that particular
Modality, technique, like acupressure, acupuncture,
Right.
medical massage. You want to know if there's a therapy that can be prescribed for someone who's going through that, is the right words you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
Modality or technique, prescription-wise, that we're getting.
I don't think we're there yet
Well,
in terms of the medical field.
I think that there are particular therapeutic interventions that are based in mindfulness. So dialectical behavioral therapy is one therapy modality that really incorporates a lot of mindfulness in it. And people, I just spoke to a mom of a young man who has severe autism, and he has been helped tremendously through a mindfulness-based dialectical behavioral therapy to deal with the symptoms of his autism that have made it hard for him to be successful in school, right? And so they've been working with him through this modality, and that's been really helping him. And so, there are actual therapists in the Pittsburgh area. Like if you go on Psychology Today website and put in mindfulness, you'll find them. There are therapeutic professionals that are doing mindfulness-based therapies. know, we're not therapists, but we can definitely support humans in learning the practices to work with kind of the regular range of emotions that we all experience as human beings.
Would there be a code, ICD code for mindless techniques?
So you mean like for a doctor or someone to?
Yeah.
We have not gotten that far in this
Yeah.
country.
Okay.
In England, in the Great Britain, they actually are having that now.
Oh, really?
It's covered by socialized medicine.
Yeah.
You can be prescribed a mindfulness program.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
My hope is that we're headed in that direction because, you know, our reliance on medication to fix problems that are really problems of human connection and gaining other skill sets, you know, we're failing people in that regard, in my personal opinion, and I know Dinesh shares it, but yeah, in our country, you know, I think the pharmaceutical, not to get too politicized on it, but the pharmaceutical industry has made our medical profession dependent on them.
Yes.
And not these other ways of being,
Absolutely.
healing ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as we heard from the gentleman that just spoke too.
Right,
So hopefully
right.
we'll get there.
Yeah, we have to lobby for that, you know, we have to keep doing the research and getting the data to prove that, you know, actually these other things are even, as he was saying, even more effective.
Well, you see, the veteran hospital have been using, for example, physical therapy and music therapy
That's
to address pain and addiction and any other illness or sickness. But yet, they don't have the ICD code for certain things. And you would think before the modalities came that they would have had something for mindedness, because mindedness is one of the beginning form of deliveries to transform a person's life.
That's right, I agree. Hopefully we get there sooner rather than later.
Well, there's enough people who have money can request for this type of service and analysis to be put in a certain category. So maybe it will come sooner than you
Yeah,
expect.
I hope so.
Sure will.
Before you leave today, I just wanted to make you aware that I've developed a whole program around this. It's relatively new, offered a 6-week pilot version of this program not too long ago. And starting in mid-January, I extended that and going to offer mindfulness-based relapse prevention to a local treatment center. So a residential treatment center. So that'll be a 12-week program starting in January. So I'm really excited about how that's going to go.
Good for you. That's the first step.
Yes,
Good
yes.
for you.
It's very good. And you know, the goal is that more and more treatment centers in the area will kind of pick this up so that they can help their clients.
Yeah, it's another alternative. And Awaken Pittsburgh we're 3 years old. We're not a very old nonprofit. We're still, you know, taking our baby steps, I guess. But we've been delivering the Helping Professionals program to support therapists and medical professionals, clergy, anyone that considers themselves a helping professional. We do basically a 9-week program to teach kind of all the basic mindfulness skills for people to support themselves in their work. So if folks that you're working with are interested, you know, they can get in touch on our website, awakenpittsburgh.org. So yes, please.
One last question. I just
Sure,
Googled the
please.
word mindfulness, and that's
Yes.
what you guys do.
Yes.
It's being consciously aware of something. And I wanted to know if there's different forms of being mindful. And so my form that I'm giving back to the community is 2 different books. One, I have RF Reinforcement Security Tip books. It's co-authored with a private investigator, U.S. Federal Protective Services, and a correction officer, and we both have certificates in the White House Communications Agency for securing the safety of a president, working with the CIA, FBI, and Secret Service. But I've created these tips on account of some of the own events that have happened in my life, creating an awareness for other people. So I was wondering if that would be a form of mindfulness, because I'm sharing that with other people so they know how to protect themselves. And then I do have a daily inspirations book called Blessed, Alive, and Well, and Highly Favored with God and Man, coming out for inspirations. And I'm far from a nun, but I really am celibate for 9 years. But I'm also a saint. You know, I'm not perfect, and the nun thing's getting ready to go. But those are forms, right?
Yeah, I would be interested in checking them out and seeing what they are, yeah.
They're really good.
Yeah, awesome, good for you.
And they're a lot.
Yeah, congrats. Yeah, that's a lot.
Well, thank you so much for having us and for hosting us, and we appreciate the opportunity to share the work that we're doing. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.